Arthur cancelled his long-awaited exhibition on the morning of the national art competition. No press release, no explanation, no final post from his official gallery account. Just a courier envelope delivered to the competition judges, containing a single item, a signed blank canvas. In the corner, below the artist's cryptic signature, Silent Quill, was a single typed line, "For Roger." The news spread like fire across the art world. Blogs exploded, galleries called in panic, collectors wept online, wondering if it was a stunt, or worse, a declaration of retirement. And while the nation argued, dissected and speculated, Arthur quietly walked into a law office, alone, no entourage, no suit, just a dark wool coat and the faint smell of charcoal still lingering in the folds of his sleeve. He signed the divorce papers without emotion. The clerk had to ask twice before he handed the file back. The signature was sharp, confident, final. When asked if he wanted to include a message for his wife, he said nothing, only stood up, pushed in his chair, and left. Maria never saw it coming. Just 2 nights earlier, she had stood beside Roger, beaming proudly at a private preview gala while he soaked in praise for a sketch she claimed was inspired by his silent brilliance. She'd introduced him to sponsors as the future of the art world, and when someone had asked where her husband was, she had laughed it off. Arthur doesn't come to these things anymore, he's been quiet. He had been quiet, and now, he was gone. Back at the national art competition, Roger arrived with the confidence of a man who believed his victory was guaranteed. The cameras followed him closely, he smiled for them, dressed in a hand-tailored blazer Maria had gifted him just a week ago. "To match your new genius status," she had whispered. But when the judges unrolled the canvas, the one he'd supposedly submitted under Silent Quill, a stunned silence fell over the room. It was blank, untouched, not a single mark, stroke or idea, only the signature, the real one. The gallery erupted in chaos. Roger's mouth fell open, Maria's hand went cold, and somewhere far away, Arthur stepped off a train into another city, dragging a weathered suitcase behind him, the corners scuffed from years of use. He didn't look back. Arthur met Maria under the cracked roof of a public school art room when they were both 12. She had bruised knees from running track and a temper too fast for most teachers to handle. He had a sketchbook filled with buildings, forgotten faces, and things that never smiled. They sat together during free period, she because she was in detention, and he because he liked quiet. She used to sneak glances at his drawings, teasing him about the way he shaded clouds like sorrow. He never said it, but she was the first person who made his hand stop trembling when he held a pencil. By the time they were 18, Arthur was winning anonymous illustration contests in France while Maria was top of her business class. They made a promise under a yellowing maple tree behind the school, they would build an empire together. He'd paint, she'd build the walls to hang his art on. When Maria's father's company crumbled in her final year of college, she nearly quit everything. But it was Arthur who offered his anonymous paintings, sold under the name Silent Quill, to prop up the brand. No one knew the identity of the reclusive artist whose pieces sold out within minutes, only that his work always appeared just when Maria's company needed a miracle. While Arthur studied in Europe, sending paintings in secret, Maria clawed her way to the top. By the time he returned 5 years later, she had become CEO of the fastest-growing design conglomerate in City A. Their wedding was small, private, quiet. He didn't want cameras. She wanted a legacy. They married at their peak, Maria in a silk gown Arthur had sketched the moment she said yes, and Arthur in the same black coat he'd worn when he first stepped off the plane. They promised each other the world again. But the world doesn't keep promises. It started small. A missed dinner here, a late meeting there. Maria had always been ambitious, but now her attention slipped more frequently. Arthur, who once painted 3 canvases a week, found himself creating only 1 every 2 months. He blamed himself for the distance. Maybe he wasn't inspiring enough, maybe she needed something more. Then Roger arrived. A sharp-tongued assistant with a polished smile and a camera-ready face, Roger entered Maria's office like a man who already knew how the script would unfold. He brought her coffee exactly how she liked it, quoted obscure Silent Quill interviews back to her, even claimed once that he felt a deep connection to the artist's color work. Arthur met him twice in the beginning, once at the office, once at a private company dinner. Roger had smiled too much, said too little, and looked at Maria for just a second too long. Arthur remembered noticing that. He remembered, too, the way Maria didn't stop it. One night, Arthur found Maria scrolling through art blogs in bed, lingering on images of Silent Quill's latest rumored sketches. Her expression was soft, dreamy. "You like that one?" Arthur had asked, gently. She nodded without looking at him. "His work feels alive, like he understands everything I don't say." He said nothing, just smiled faintly and rolled onto his side. The next morning, Roger posted a sketch online using a shadowy account. It mimicked Silent Quill's brushwork. Maria saw it and gasped. "He's back! Silent Quill's released a new piece!" Arthur stared at the screen in silence. It wasn't his, but the signature had been forged, nearly perfect. That night, Maria came home late. She smelled of champagne and triumph. "Roger has talent," she said, toeing off her heels. "I think he might be the one I've been looking for to collaborate with. He's different." Arthur didn't speak. He simply walked into his studio and locked the door. More Silent Quill paintings began appearing in galleries, unsigned, mysterious. Maria called them gifts from the universe. Arthur knew better. The colors were wrong, the line work shaky, but they were close enough to pass, especially for fans who'd never met the real artist. Maria praised Roger constantly now, at meetings, at press conferences, sometimes even at home. She framed his sketches, hung them beside Arthur's older fading work. "Look at the emotion in Roger's pieces," she would say. "You can feel the movement." Arthur started to feel like a ghost in his own life. He stopped painting. Maria didn't notice. Roger started staying late at the house, first for work, then for drinks, then, just because. Arthur asked once, "Do you really think he's Silent Quill?" Maria laughed. "He doesn't like to talk about it, but yes, I believe he is." Arthur looked down at his ink-stained hands. "You believe wrong." She didn't answer. The final fracture came when she suggested putting Arthur's studio space to better use. "He doesn't paint anymore," she told the staff. "Might as well turn it into a conference room." Roger nodded beside her, smirking. "We'll call it the Quill Room." Arthur left that night and checked into a hotel under a fake name. He stared at a blank canvas for hours, then he signed it, wrote one line beneath the name, Silent Quill, and sealed it for delivery. For Roger. The first time Maria called Roger Silent Quill in public, Arthur had been sitting 3 rows behind her in the audience. It was at the unveiling of a charity mural, an event Arthur had painted for, anonymously, months ago. The media cameras flashed wildly as Maria pulled Roger onto the stage, her hand resting confidently on his shoulder. "I'm proud to finally introduce the world to the artist behind the masterpiece," she smiled. "He prefers to stay silent, but you all know him as Silent Quill." The applause was deafening. Roger bowed modestly, lowered his head like a humble genius, and whispered something into Maria's ear that made her laugh. Arthur didn't clap, he didn't speak, he simply stood, walked out of the venue, and kept walking. From that moment, it was official. Maria had begun building Roger's identity around a stolen myth. His face was now tied to gallery ads, donation drives, live sketching events. The signature wasn't even his, but the lie stuck. Maria didn't just support it. She celebrated it. At a board dinner, she gave a toast. To Roger, for bringing color and soul to a world that desperately needs it, and to Silent Quill, for letting his brush speak what words cannot. Arthur was seated 3 seats away, boxed in by photographers, ignored like a placeholder. Later that night, back home, Arthur found Roger in his studio. He was flipping through Arthur's old sketchbooks, running his fingers over the margins. Arthur's brushes had been used, water still pooled in the mixing tray. "Get out," Arthur said calmly. Roger turned, startled. "Oh, I was just looking for inspiration. This room is mine. Was yours." Maria appeared at the doorway, arms crossed. "Arthur, don't be dramatic. Roger's going to be painting in here from now on. You haven't touched a canvas in months." Arthur didn't answer. He just walked past them, picked up a blank sheet, and sat quietly at the desk. "I'm registering for the National Art Competition," he said after a pause. "As Silent Quill." Maria scoffed. "You?" Roger smirked. "You're serious?" Arthur looked up. Deadly. The next day, the news leaked. Silent Quill returns, unexpected entry in National Art Competition. Blogs speculated wildly. Some thought it was a hoax, others whispered about the real artist stepping forward to defend his name. Maria confronted Arthur in the living room, her voice low and dangerous. "What do you think you're doing?" He stared at her. "Taking back what's mine." She clenched her jaw. "If you're not silent, Quill, then don't stand in his way." That night, before he could submit his final piece, Arthur was ambushed. He had stayed late in the competition building, refining his work in the preparation room. The lights buzzed overhead, paint still wet, his hands steady, then a soft voice behind him. "Need a hand?" He turned. Roger grinned. Maria stood beside him. Arthur blinked, confused. "What are you doing here?" Maria stepped forward. "You always said you hated crowds. I thought I'd save you the embarrassment of losing." He barely had time to move before Roger swung the heavy portfolio case into his left wrist. The crack echoed. Arthur fell to his knees, groaning. Maria said nothing. Roger pulled a metal tripod from the corner and smashed it down. Bone shattered, skin split. Arthur screamed. Maria watched in silence, her arms folded, her expression unreadable. When it was over, Arthur lay crumpled on the cold tile floor, his hands mangled beyond recognition. Roger leaned down. "Next time you want to be a ghost, stay dead." Arthur coughed blood, barely whispering, "You'll regret this." Maria knelt beside him, her tone icy. "If you're not silent, Quill, then don't pretend to be, and if you are, why didn't I ever feel it from you?" His vision faded, the light of her head flickered. Then, darkness, silence, then breath. When Arthur opened his eyes again, the air smelled of old varnish and winter. His hands were intact, the clock on the wall read 10:15 a.m. His phone buzzed beside him, a message from the art competition committee. "Mr. Arthur Wang, your reserved spot as Silent Quill in the national painting competition is still unconfirmed. Please complete your registration within the next 10 days. 10 days. Arthur sat upright, heart pounding. Everything was familiar, too familiar. The studio, the brush tray, the email. He'd been reborn, 10 days before the event. This time, he wouldn't rush to confront, he wouldn't plead. He would orchestrate. Carefully, silently. He'd watched them betray him once, that was enough. Now, he would let them walk themselves into the fire. Arthur had always believed that the mind could forget things, but the hands never did. Now, with a second chance, his hands moved with new precision, but the memories in them had never faded. He sat alone in the villa's sunroom, where the afternoon light fell through the maple trees. Once, Maria had kissed him here after a long workday, the scent of ink on his fingertips, her laughter warming the glass walls. Now it was just silent, cold. Even the shadows seemed to mock him. He remembered the way she used to trace the veins of leaves with her fingers and say, "One day, you'll paint this tree for our children to swing under." But now the only swinging he envisioned was a blade. Maria's betrayal replayed in fragments, her hand resting on Roger's arm during gallery interviews, her soft voice feeding lies to the media about Roger's vision as Silent Quill, her quiet hum as she helped him rehearse stolen answers in the kitchen Arthur once built. One evening, Arthur watched through the cracked door as Roger stood in his old studio, holding a canvas upside down. Maria was laughing, gently correcting him. "No, Roger, the brushstroke should taper, just like Arthur's used to." Roger responded with a smirk. "Maybe I need Arthur to paint it for me again." The next morning, Arthur received a text from an anonymous number. "Roger, I'm really struggling with the new piece. I know we haven't always seen eye to eye, but maybe you'd be willing to paint one last time, for me? I'll pay." Arthur stared at the screen, the corners of his mouth twitching in disgust. He typed slowly. "Arthur, let's not talk about money. I'll paint something for you right away." He sent the message, then pulled out a blank canvas. Carefully, meticulously, he signed it with the real Silent Quill signature. No sketch, no color, no soul, just a trap. He sealed the canvas and set it by the door. His hands were steady. Lol. His mind was not. That night, Arthur walked to the back of the villa and opened a trunk that hadn't been touched in 3 years. Inside were all the relics Maria once claimed to treasure: letters, drawings, childhood Polaroids, half-burnt candles from their first shared apartment. He lit a match and dropped it. The flame consumed them faster than he expected. By the time the last letter curled into black ash, Arthur stood in a darkened room lit only by the blaze and the faint glint of a train ticket tucked into his coat pocket. City B, one way. He had already cancelled his competition entry. Let them fight over it. The next day, a courier envelope arrived from the National Art Guild. Arthur opened it casually. Inside was a letter. Dear Mr. Wang, your honorary trophy for artistic contribution has been successfully claimed, signed by Roger F. Lin. His fingers clenched the paper until it crumpled. 2 hours later, Arthur arrived at Maria's office unannounced. The secretary hesitated at first, but Arthur's calm voice cut through any resistance. Inside the penthouse floor, Roger sat comfortably in Arthur's old reading chair, sipping red wine, the crystal trophy proudly displayed beside him on the glass table. Maria stood behind him, casually scrolling her phone. Arthur didn't say anything at first, he simply walked up to the trophy and reached for it. Roger smirked. Yours? I signed for it. That makes it mine, doesn't it? Arthur's hand hovered over the base. Give it back. Or what? Roger said louder, making sure Maria could hear. You'll hit me in front of her? Before Arthur could respond, Roger grabbed the trophy and smashed it against the marble floor. The glass shattered, pieces skidding across the room. A sharp shard slashed Roger's forearm, blood dripped dramatically down his sleeve. Oh God! Maria rushed forward instantly, panic in her voice. Roger, are you okay? He clutched his arm, gasping. I didn't mean to break it. Arthur tried to take it from me. He scared me. Arthur stood frozen, glass cutting into the soles of his shoes. He said nothing. Maria glared at him. What is wrong with you? Do you even realize what you've done? He turned, walked past her without a word, and disappeared down the hall. In his room, he opened the drawer. The divorce agreement was still there, unsigned. Her name had been written weeks ago. She had been the one to bring it up. He stared at it for a moment, then picked up the pen. Arthur Wang. Ink glided across the paper like it had been waiting to be released. 15 years of love, 3 years of marriage, all signed away with a flick of the wrist. He left the document in the center of the bed, placed neatly beside a paperweight Maria had once gifted him. Later that night, he began coughing violently. At first he thought it was just stress. But then the blood came. Hot, thick, staining the sink. By the time the ambulance arrived, he had collapsed in the hall. When he opened his eyes again, the hospital light was pale yellow. The doctor leaned over him, whispering urgently to the nurse. Too much blood lost, we need a donor match now. Maria stormed in moments later, out of breath. I'm a match. I'll donate. But... Arthur tried to lift his hand toward her. She slapped it away. You want my blood? Fine. But you promise me, on paper, if needed, that you will never target Roger again, not in business, not in art, not in life. Arthur stared at her in disbelief. The clock ticked. 30 seconds. 20. You're running out of time, Arthur, she said coldly. Say yes. He nodded once, and then everything faded. The luxury resort was perched on the cliffside of a private island, its balconies carved from pale marble and its infinity pools reflecting the sky like glass. Maria had booked the suite under a different name, just in case the press caught wind. Roger stretched out on the silk-sheeted bed, shirtless, as Maria walked in with a tray of sliced fruit and champagne. This is insane, he said, grinning. You really booked out the whole spa floor? Maria set the tray down beside him. You said you needed to feel inspired before the competition. And, inspiration, Roger said, sitting up slowly, needs pampering. That was the start of the 3-day retreat. She massaged his shoulders every night, drew baths infused with lavender oils, prepared his meals with care, and fed him between sketches. Sometimes he posed, pretending to capture distant muses. Sometimes he watched her undress, claiming it helped his eye for form. He requested a full-body modeling session, and she agreed, standing under dim lights while he stared at her with an artist's gaze and a lover's hunger. On the second night, after dinner on the balcony, Roger leaned in close and whispered, Art lives in vulnerability. I want to explore that, with you. Maria froze. He kissed her hand slowly. Don't you remember? That night, the one where you wanted to give up everything? You saw Silent Quill's painting in that gallery. That one saved you. That painting was mine. Her chest tightened. She had cried in front of that canvas. The sea and the sky. Gentle brushwork, hues that felt like a second chance. It had been the lowest night of her life, bankrupt, homeless, alone. but that painting had stopped her from stepping into traffic. It was that night that gave birth to her obsession with the artist, her hunt for Silent Quill, her love for the man behind the brush. Roger knew that story, and he knew exactly when to use it. Maria let the memory wash over her, then nodded slowly. She leaned into his kiss, eyes closed. That night, she let Roger hold her, let him believe she was his. Across the city, Arthur sat in his studio, alive but quiet. His recovery had been slower than expected, his ribs still ached and the blood transfusion had left him weaker than he'd ever felt, but his hands were steady again. He was painting, not for competitions, not for validation, for himself. Susan had called him earlier that morning, asking if he wanted to sketch the autumn trees at the river bend, but he declined. Not yet. There was something unfinished, something rotting in the past he hadn't yet destroyed. Arthur opened the cabinet drawer and pulled out the file, Roger's digital portfolio. Forged works, borrowed styles, stolen drafts. Among them, one stood out, Purgatory. It was the piece Arthur had created after his kidnapping, 3 days of forced labor under fluorescent lights, paintbrush taped to his fractured fingers, canvas after canvas bleeding horror. The one piece that had survived, the one Roger had stolen, the one Maria had outbid him for at the auction and gifted to Roger, believing it was his own pain. Arthur typed. 2. Roger, let's trade. 1 new Silent Quill original for your copy of Purgatory, tomorrow morning. No questions, just art. Roger replied within seconds. Done. The courier arrived the next day with a flat, tightly sealed wooden frame. Arthur didn't even open it. He took it out back, laid it on a concrete slab, and doused it in lighter fluid. Then he lit a match. The flames snapped violently as the canvas curled into black fragments. He watched every inch of pain, trauma, and violation disappear in smoke. When it was nothing but ash, he stood up, wiped the soot from his palms, and walked back inside. Maria returned the following afternoon, her heels echoing against the polished floor of the villa. Roger trailed behind her, smiling like a boy who had won a prize. Arthur, she called, spotting him in the foyer, we're back. He glanced up briefly, said nothing. We had a great time, she continued, glancing at Roger. He's really pushing himself, wants to paint something for me, live at the competition. Arthur leaned against the doorway, calm. Is that so? Roger smirked. You'll see it, front row, when I win. Arthur's gaze flicked to Maria, who looked oddly pleased. He's growing every day, she said, even without your approval. Arthur walked toward them slowly, the silence stretched. Maria shifted uncomfortably. Look, if you can't support him, maybe you shouldn't come to the competition. He didn't respond. Actually, she added, almost defiantly, we're planning to spend another few days together. After he wins, maybe a hotel suite downtown. Just us. Arthur stopped in front of her. He looked her in the eyes. There was no anger, no sorrow, no flicker of nostalgia left in him. Only ice. Enjoy it, he said softly. Then he turned around and walked away. The national art competition was no longer just an art event, it had become a spectacle. News vans lined the streets, drones buzzed overhead, and giant digital billboards flashed Roger's face next to the mysterious Silent Quill logo. A sea of banners reading, "Believe the brush," waved in the wind as Maria stepped out of her limousine, wrapped in a custom satin gown, patterned with abstract brushstrokes meant to echo his style. Roger followed behind her, adjusting the cufflinks she had gifted him the night before. Camera flashes exploded like fireworks as they entered the venue. Roger Lynn, is this the year Silent Quill reveals himself to the world? President Maria Liu, is it true the final masterpiece will be dedicated to you? Maria gave her usual soft smile. You'll see for yourself. Roger didn't answer. He just nodded slightly, eyes hidden behind tinted designer glasses, trying to mask the beads of sweat already forming at his hairline. Inside, the competition hall was a cathedral of anticipation. Artists from across the country had gathered, some skeptics, some believers, all with paint on their fingers and fire in their eyes. But Roger was the one everyone watched. Is that really him? Someone whispered. Can't be. Silent Quill wouldn't show up like this. He has a PR team. Since when do painters need PR? He's a fraud. He's a genius. Roger stepped up to his private booth, an isolated glass chamber where contestants would paint in silence for 3 hours before unveiling their final work to the judges. His hands trembled slightly as he uncapped his brushes. He hadn't brought any sketches, no drafts. He was expecting Arthur to save him again. But the blank canvas stared back at him like a silent judge. Maria stood just outside the booth, her arms crossed, watching intently. "Take your time," she mouthed to him. "You've got this." He nodded, then turned back. To the canvas, paint hovering in mid-air, unmoving. 10 minutes passed, then 20. His brush hadn't touched the surface. Outside, the judges murmured behind their panels. "What is he doing? He's panicking. He's not the real one." The crowd watching the livestream grew restless. Comment threads exploded. Maria clenched her fists. "He's just thinking. Silent Quill works best in silence." One of the judges whispered, "Then why enter a public competition?" Inside the booth, Roger finally dipped the brush into a pale gray, then hesitated. His stroke came out shaky, like it didn't belong. He paused, wiped it away, tried again, smeared it, tried again. His face turned pale. His eyes darted to the corner of the room. No Arthur, no salvation. Time dwindled. With only 30 minutes left on the clock, Roger abandoned the brush entirely and turned to his phone, a plan hatched in panic. He downloaded the screenshot Arthur had sent weeks ago, the direct message where Roger had begged the real Silent Quill to paint something for me, I'll pay anything. He printed it, enlarged it, framed it against a backdrop of white, then covered it with a black cloth. 3 hours later, the moment of truth arrived. Each contestant wheeled their artwork onto the stage. Vibrant, painful, joyful, skillful. The judges walked slowly, studying them with narrowed eyes and sharpened critique. Then came Roger. He stepped onto the stage with exaggerated calm. The lights dimmed. "I want to dedicate this piece," he began, microphone in hand, "to the one who inspired me to pick up a brush, my muse, my savior, my love, Maria." The crowd murmured with delight. Maria's lips curled into a proud smile. Roger took a breath. "I am Silent Quill, and this is my final confession." He pulled the cloth down. Gasps echoed like gunshots. On the canvas, no painting, no colors, no strokes, just a projection of a chat log, his message begging Silent Quill for a painting, with Arthur's cryptic reply. "Let's not talk about money. I'll paint something for you right away." The timestamp, the username, the signature, all real. Silence. Then someone in the back shouted, "He bought his art." Another, "He's a fake." Silent Quill wouldn't need to ask for help. He got played. The room erupted into chaos. Roger stood frozen, eyes wide, sweat dripping. He looked to Maria for support, but she was no longer smiling. She had stepped forward, grabbed his phone from his hand, and scrolled through the message thread. There were dozens, dates, pleas, bribes, begging Arthur for more Silent Quill paintings. Her hand trembled. Then, on the stage's giant screen, the live stream from the judges' panel switched feeds. The headline flashed in red, Silent Quill's true identity revealed, Arthur Wang. Underneath, bullet points appeared. Exclusive confirmation from the National Artist Registry, signature and time-stamped proofs of previous artworks, video of Arthur painting under surveillance at B City Guild, verified witnesses, including Susan Choi, former peer and senior artist, the final blow, a photo of Arthur holding a brush mid-stroke beside a signed canvas, next to a quote. "I no longer paint to prove anything, I paint because it's the only part of me they couldn't steal." Arthur Wang, Silent Quill. Maria's knees buckled. She didn't faint from embarrassment, she collapsed from realization. The man she had scorned, abused, replaced. He wasn't just her husband. He was him. While medics rushed to help her off the stage, Roger attempted to speak again, but the microphone was cut. The audience booed him off. Across the city, the lights in B City's central gallery glowed gold. The Silent Quill solo exhibition had just opened. Lines stretched down the block. Cameras flashed, critics whispered that this might be the greatest exhibition of the decade. Arthur stood at the entrance, dressed in a black turtleneck, flanked by press and fellow artists. He wasn't smiling, but he wasn't bitter either. Susan stood beside him, elegant in an ivory dress. Her calm presence complemented his composed silence. The crowd watched as she slid her hand gently into his. When the doors opened, guests flooded in, gasping at the collection. At the center of the room, lit under a singular spotlight, hung the largest painting of them all. A portrait. Soft brushstrokes shaped a woman gazing gently over her shoulder, light falling on her cheek, her eyes filled with quiet strength and warmth. The title read, "The Real Bride." At the bottom of the frame, written in Arthur's steady hand, "To Susan, my future wife." It started with flowers, peonies, Arthur's favorite, delivered to the gallery's back entrance with no note, just an embossed card that read, M. Then came the art supplies, rare pigments from Florence, custom brushes from Kyoto, a hand-bound sketchbook with his initials pressed into the leather. Each gift was returned without a word. Then the dresses, designer collections Maria used to wear when she accompanied Arthur to galas. She left them with the receptionist. They too came back, tags untouched, still sealed in plastic. Finally, she sent a letter, not just a note, but an apology, sprawled across 5 pages of trembling handwriting. It wasn't about love, it was about guilt. "I was blind," she wrote. "I thought fame meant love. I thought control meant affection. I buried your name behind another man's brush just to see myself rise. And you still painted." Susan was the one who intercepted it. She didn't tear it, she didn't mock it. She simply walked into the room, holding it loosely in one hand. Maria stood near the steps of the gallery, as if rehearsing a final performance. "I came to apologize," Maria said, voice soft, eyes darting between Susan's calm expression and the envelope in her hand. "No," Susan said. "You came to absolve yourself. There's a difference." Maria's eyes widened. "You're not sorry for what you did to him," Susan continued, stepping closer. "You're sorry it didn't work. You're sorry he didn't break. You're sorry he loved someone else, and that you're not her." Maria's lips quivered. "You're still painting yourself into his story," Susan said. "But he stopped writing you in years ago." Maria said nothing as Susan left her there. That was the last time anyone saw Maria Liu outside Arthur Wang's gallery. Months passed, then years. Maria faded from the art world like a signature erased in rain. Her once dominant art accounts went dark. Sponsors withdrew, brands replaced her with rising protégés. Even her foundation, the Muse project, was quietly absorbed by a rival non-profit. A few tabloids speculated breakdown. Others guessed exile. But in the circles that mattered, she simply vanished. Meanwhile, Arthur and Susan painted the world brighter. Their joint exhibitions crossed borders, from Shanghai to Stockholm, New York to Nagoya. Their gallery openings were part museum, part miracle. Reviewers spoke of the stillness in Arthur's strokes and the warmth behind Susan's light. He never sought revenge. He never mentioned Maria's name again. He simply kept painting, and he kept Susan beside him. They didn't need grand gestures, just quiet moments, his hand brushing hers under the table. Her laugh when his brush fell onto his shirt. Sunday mornings spent painting different versions of the same scene from their window. He was finally living the life he had once imagined, with the woman who saw his silence not as a flaw but as a language she'd learned to speak fluently. 2 years later. The Elysian Dreams exhibit launched in Paris, a curated masterpiece of Arthur and Susan's collective journey through loss, reinvention, and love. The crowd was an ocean of elegance, curators, collectors, and critics all mingling beneath golden lighting and crystalline wine glasses. At the center of the exhibition hung the latest of Arthur's emotional behemoths. A painting titled Frost. It depicted a frozen lake under a silent sky, a single figure standing at the edge with her reflection cracked across the surface, distant, cold, and beautiful, but unreachable. The piece sent shivers through the crowd. Susan stood beside Arthur in a soft cream dress, her hair pinned loosely with small blue blossoms. He reached up during a lull in the chatter and gently tucked a strand behind her ear. "Let's go," he whispered. She smiled. They walked past critics and collectors, hand in hand. In the far corner of the gallery, away from the lights, hidden by shadows, stood a woman in dark glasses and a long black coat. Her hair was dyed ash gray, her scarf drawn tight. Maria. She didn't speak, she didn't move, she just watched as the man she once owned passed her by without even blinking. No anger, no recognition, just peace, and that hurt more than hatred ever could. As the last of the guests followed the couple out of the main room, Maria's knees gave out. She dropped to the floor by the wall, just beneath the dim spotlight of a forgotten corner. There, barely visible to anyone else, hung a small painting. one she herself had created. Swing. A simple canvas from Arthur's early days. Two children laughing on a backyard swing. Maria had painted it for him when they first moved in together, years before the betrayal, back when love still felt raw and clumsy and unguarded. Arthur had kept it, but unlike his other works, Swing was poorly lit, slightly off-center, the paint faded with age. It wasn't vandalized, it wasn't glorified, it simply existed, forgotten, like a footnote to a chapter he had long stopped rereading. Maria placed her hand against the wall and cried, silently, painfully, until the gallery lights dimmed completely. Outside, Paris glowed like a watercolor in motion. Inside, two paintings told the story of what had been. Swing, a relic of a love once pure. Frost, a monument to everything that followed and everything he had overcome. Maria would leave that night, no fanfare, no final words. Just the sound of her own footsteps fading beneath the moonlight. And inside the gallery, Frost remained, untouched, eternal. A painting not of revenge, but of closure.